Good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever it is for you. I'm Brent, an author, amateur world builder, writing educator. You can find me as werewolf-dr on Threads, Instagram, Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube, as well as here, or werewolf_dr at Bluesky. In fact, I will go ahead and put links in the chat. There we go. Or if you're looking at this on YouTube, in the description. I did not get a chance to, let's go back in there and change some things around here real quick, because we're not talking, well, actually we are talking about Magic Education Society after a fashion, but let me go ahead and change things around here a little bit. That's all good, that's all happy, never mind that. Manager, that's where I want to go. Maybe? Is that where I want to go? I don't remember where I want to go. I don't remember what I want to do. There? Nope. Darn it, I'm forgetting what I want to do. Where I want to go. There we go. That's what I want to do. We're going to change the stream info. That's better. Let's get rid of the education bit. We're just looking at magic and society in world building. And I think that's going to be it. Okay, cool. That's better. Let's reload that and see what happens. Sorry, I'm just getting started here and doing a little bit of cleaning up because I just came out of teaching multiple classes, and then came straight home to do this by choice. There we go. Cool. All set up. Awesome. So anyway, as I was saying, one thing I'm looking at doing today is talking about, let me make sure my volume is good. Awesome. Cool. Talking about societies and magic and how basically societies deal with magic in various forms. This is kind of a abbreviated version of some stuff I've been thinking about for a number of years, and my hair is apparently a complete mess, but oh well. What else is new? So, anyway, when we're looking at how societies respond to magic, how they work with them, and they will respond to them and work with them, and they will be influenced or modified by them in various ways, possibly the first thing we want to think about is whether the magic in question is hidden, open, or a mix of the two. Because a hidden magic is going to be less effective, or effective rather, in some ways than an open magic system. If we have an open magic in the world, we're going to see the direct results much more clear, much more obviously. Whether that be in terms of clear legislation, devices, presence of strange creatures, people throwing spells on wherever it happens to be, diviners being consulted, that sort of thing. If we have a hidden magic, then if there are any effects, they're going to be more subtle, or they're going to be more behind the scenes rather than on the surface in some regards. And if we have a mix of both, what that basically would mean is we have some magics that are open, perhaps accepted socially, and some that are hidden or concealed, whether because they are illegal or their practitioners are secretive or something along those lines. And which one we go with is going to determine a lot about the society as a whole and what the society is doing or capable of doing, or rather how the society reacts and is influenced by the system or the magic. And as I noted, any system, any culture, any society is going to be influenced, affected, modified by whatever magic is going on, because it's an integral part of the culture. It's going to be affecting things just as much as having, say, technology or religion or things along those lines is going to affect the society. On a related question, we have the issue of, is magic legal? Is it illegal? Illegal, that is, or a mix of both? In some cases, you may have a situation where we have a legal magic that is accepted socially within the society, and we have an illegal magic which is not accepted by society, is or parts of, or certain practices of magic that are illegal. So, for example, we might say that magic in general is acceptable within society. However, that enchantment, that is magic that affects the mind, potentially takes away free will or consent or whatnot, takes away the agency of the individual, may be considered illegal or highly restricted. So that itself is an immediate effect of magic on a society, but it's also a way to limit or shape how the magic affects the society. Legal magics will obviously have a very clear and hopefully blatant effect on society, in that if, for example, teleport circles, magic circles, teleport platforms, those sorts of things are common, then they're going to have an obvious effect on travel and moving around a city, moving around a nation, moving around a world. If, on the other hand, say, using enchantment to erase people's memories is illegal, then it's not going to have as blatant or obvious an effect on the society, but it will have an effect there somewhere, because it will be potentially illicit use that's going through there. So it would be affecting crime, and it might be affecting law enforcement in some ways. There may be cases where it's used as a legal punishment. On a technology side, a good example of that's going to be C.J. Cherry's basically C.J. Cherry's known universe, where on various places like Farpoint, I think it was Farpoint, TriPoint, or the Affinity's End book, or Down Below Station, basically what amounts to mind wiping is a valid legal punishment for various crimes and whatnot. In other cases, from the magic side, that might be illicit or illegal, and there may be places out there, or criminal elements out there that use it for various reasons, whether for purposes of removing witnesses, or purposes of choice, elective. Somebody may want to have memory erased, whatever it happens to be. So the big things we're looking at for magic and its effect on society's first big questions are hidden, open, or both, legal, illegal, or both. Then we have a bunch of different ways it can come into play within a society. So I think a good first breakdown, actually, before we even get into that, it's good to think about how common is magic in that society. If it's not very common, if it's something that is if it's a magic that is unusual, that is rare, that not many people use, then it's probably not going to have as much of an effect. If magic in general is rare, difficult to come across, it's probably not going to have a huge effect, or maybe not even a significant effect on the society. If, on the other hand, it's ubiquitous, it's all over the place, you can find people doing it on street corners, then it's going to have a bigger impact on the society. Tied in with that, not only how common is it, but how how many people have access to it? How accessible is magic? If it's something that only people who take years of training can use, then it's probably going to be fairly limited in terms of the impact it has. If it's something that anybody can pick up with a couple of weeks or maybe a month or so of training, it's going to have a bigger impact. If magical devices can be made and they're relatively easy to make, then we're going to have a bigger impact on society. If magical devices are difficult to make, they're legendary, they take a certain, say, part of the caster's life or something like that to create, then they're not going to be as common, and then they're going to have a smaller impact on society for hopefully clear reasons. Tied in with that is who can use magic, who can learn it. That can be down to, is it something that's genetic? Is it something that just takes study? Is it something that is innate to a particular group of people, whether that be, elves or dwarves or whatever it happens to be? And just because a group of people can use it doesn't necessarily mean that they all learn it. So we could say, for example, that our magic system is genetic based. There's a particular gene that allows people to use magic, but it's present in, say, 10% of the population. So 1 in 10 people will have the potential to be able to use magic. However, we might say that of those potential 1 in 10, only half generally get trained. So now we've gone down from a 10% availability to a 5% availability and access. And they could be only that 5%, that smaller percentage could be the only ones who learn because of either status or because of being identified or because of whatever thing we want to throw in there. Last but not least of these big ones is, how is it learned? Is this something that takes a formal education? Is it something that takes years of study? Is it something that takes a few weeks, like a correspondence course? Is it something that's kind of innate that people can teach themselves? All of these things affect how much influence magic is going to have on the society. So for those who came in, things we want to look at when we're thinking about how magic impacts a society, basic level stuff that goes back to the magic system is hidden, open, or both, legal, illegal, or both for magic. How common is it? How accessible is it? Who can use it? Who can learn it? And how is it learned? Those 7 questions are going to have a major impact on how much magic influences a given society. Because they're going to be largely about how readily available is it and how obvious is its impact going to be. After those, we start looking into other things. 2 big ones that I think are important to look at before getting into really, really kind of nitty-gritty nuts and bolts influence or effects are going to be the relationship between technology and magic and the relationship between religion and magic. The technology magic relationship, I think, is going to be a really important one, because in its own way, both of them work in very similar fashions. How magic might impact society is very similar to how technology may impact society, in terms of accessibility, in terms of legality, in terms of commonality, accessibility, who can use it, and all that sort of stuff. So, and we also have this history, thanks to the history of the fantasy genre, particularly urban fantasy and such, of the divide or interconnectedness between technology and magic. If the two work together well, then they may have parallel development or parallel evolution. They may even interweave so that we have techno-magic coming into play, which will have its own impact on society and such. If they are inimical to each other, if that is, they conflict with each other, they don't work together well, or they don't play nice together, then the presence of magic in a society in certain quantities may diminish the development of technology, or vice versa. The presence of technology may diminish the impact or the growth of magic in the society. And then there's a whole bunch of other space in between all of that. It's a big spectrum with a whole bunch of different things going on in there. So that one's an important one to think about too. Is what is the relationship between technology in the setting and magic in the setting? Because those two will play off of each other or build into each other depending on how they respond with each other, and whether they play nice together or not, to put it that way. If we have a technology focused or technology heavy and they work together well, we may have a steampunk situation, or a steampunk fantasy situation where we have techno magic all over the place. Or we may have a situation that, I'll use the example of, to use urban fantasy, we'll use Ilona Andrews and the Kate Daniels series with post Shift Atlanta as the example. In this particular setting, technology and magic are in conflict. They don't play nice together. But the Magipocalypse, the return of magic to the world, has come in waves, so that you'll have maybe a couple days where technology is working and technology is dominant and magic doesn't work at all. Then you'll have a couple days where magic is up and magic is working and technology is not working anymore. And then so on and so forth and so on and so forth. In this situation, magic is getting stronger, technology is getting weaker. So these spans where magic works are becoming more extended, and the spans where technology works and magic doesn't are becoming shorter. But as magic goes, when magic is up, forests, natural places, etc., start seeing exponential growth, and buildings, particularly buildings over, I think it was 2 or 3 stories, or buildings that are not almost purely muscle made, or basic, like pre-industrial technology made, crumble as magic eats away at them. So the magic and technology there have a very big impact in terms of magic becoming ascendant, is causing technology to crumble, which is drastically affecting society. In what would have been probably roughly early to mid 21st century Atlanta. I think that they planned it as roughly 30 or 40 years ahead of the present day when they were writing it, if I recall correctly. I might be mistaken on that. The other big one there that I mentioned was religion and magic. These two are really important together because they're both in some ways in the same business. When it comes to presenting organized religion and such, when it comes to building a faith, the business of miracles, the religion becomes kind of the business of miracles, and the miracles come on the part of the divine, and the miracles are the evidence that the divine exists. Because Saint John can go ahead and cure somebody's blindness by touching them, the divine exists. But if those miracles can be replicated by some guy, some woman who spent a month reading a book, mumbling some or saying some strange ancient words, the magic and religion are using the same stuff, and they're in competition with each other at that point. So they both become the business of miracles, and that can bring them into conflict. It can also be problematic If the religion does not have access to miracles, there's no, say, divine magic or clerical magic, but magicians do. Wizards, sorcerers, whatever you want to call it, do. To put it in D&D terms, think of it as you have a setting in which there are no clerics, paladins, or there's only real big divine. Technically, druids are divine casters, but they're also getting their power from nature, so they're a weird situation. But we'll say there are no clerics, no paladins, only wizards and sorcerers. What's the impetus then for following or giving funds to or patronizing the temples if they're not necessarily doing anything for you? Whereas you can go down the street to the wizard who lives about a block down from the temple and get your magic done for them. So there becomes the potential for conflict going in there. Now that said, in some cases the religion may control the magic, so that even if the magic is coming from, say, learning, not from a divine source, the religion may say that the temple of God of Magic, all magicians in the society have to be part of the temple. They have to be trained by the temple, they have to be members of the temple, they have to be approved of by the temple. So the temple basically controls the magic that way, even if there's no divine magic. If there's a combination of divine magic and non-divine magic, then we got to work into how do those relate to each other? How do they interact with each other? Obviously D&D and most gaming that came out of it worked with clerics have certain capabilities, wizards have other capabilities, and never the two shall meet. And that works for them for balance and that sort of thing. In other cases, and there are of course exceptions, in other cases it may be that both can do similar jobs, but the source of power, the source of energy is different. And that's another kind of interaction relationship that's going to come into play. And even beyond the business of miracles, organized religion, organized wizardry, organized magic is going to potentially have political differences, political relationships within a society. So there will be potential for their relationship in terms of conflict or lack thereof, or alliances and that sort of thing. We look at our own history and Western civilization, European civilization. Christianity had a long and complicated relationship with magic. On one hand, way back when, church authorities tried to divide magic into two categories, miracles and sorcery. Miracles were things that came from God. Sorcery was stuff that came from elsewhere, usually bad elsewhere. But what counted as one or the other was never clear. It came down to the observer and where the person using the magic fell within the sphere of the church. If they were in good standing with the church, then they were doing miracles. If they were in bad standing with the church, they were doing sorcery. Typically, something along those lines. If they towed the church line, they were doing miracles. If they were kind of an outsider or went against the church line, weren't completely with the faith, then they were doing sorcery. But a lot of the rituals looked amazingly similar to each other. A lot of the practices looked remarkably similar to each other, from the records that we have and the stories that we have. So there was a very complicated relationship, and eventually, by the time we get into the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, most of the people who were doing non-miracle magic were learning it at universities that were run by the church and were technically members of the clergy, even if they were lay clergy. So that further complicates the issue, or the question of the relationship there. So yeah, I think we take a look at technology magic, we take a look at religion and magic, because religion and magic are going to be two big things that are dealing with supernatural or paranormal forces, things that are not necessarily within the Newtonian physics of the world, if there is such a thing as Newtonian physics in the world. They're the things looking at the how the world works, why the world works, powers and energies that are beyond the understanding or the capability of the average person. And those are going to necessarily either come into conflict with each other or come into some kind of understanding with each other. Excuse me. A few things that are going to be up there before we get into the realm of individual nuts and bolts type things. One other thing that comes to mind that's going to be an important thing to consider when we're looking at how magic affects society is the social standing of magicians and the social standing of magic itself. And that I would break down into four major areas. So for both magic and magicians, we want to think about, first and foremost, acceptance within society. Is magic accepted in society? Is it not accepted in society? Are magicians accepted in society? Because it is possible that we could say the society as a whole accepts the presence of magic, finds it useful, finds it necessary, but does not accept the people who are trained to use it, or does not fully accept them within society. And that may be a thing where they get kind of into a parallel society. That may be a thing where they get put into a lower social standing. That may be a thing where they become sort of monastic in some regards. A good example of this would be Trudy Canavan's Magicians Guild series, in which all of the members of the guild, which is the only legal method of place to learn magic, are members of the upper class, the nobility. However, in order to become students at the guild, they have to give up any claim to their titles, any ties to their family, and any ties to any kind of inheritance from the family. So they have to basically be removed from society, from the upper class social structure, to go into the guild and thereby learn and use magic. So magic is accepted in the society. It's deemed necessary in the society. It's deemed useful and artistic. But the practitioners have to be removed from the social hierarchy and the social order in order to learn how to do what they do. So it's a somewhat complicated relationship socially in that regard. In some cases, magic may not be accepted, or it may be accepted at certain social levels. It might be something that the upper class accepts, but the impoverished, the working class don't. It could be something that the upper class looks at as being mere superstition, but the lower classes, like your impoverished people, your peasant classes, your trades classes, use on a regular basis, or still follow and whatnot. A good example there, just historically, would be, excuse me, my nose is really itchy. Anyway, a good example historically would be, say, the role of the blacksmith. Blacksmithing has for a long time been, metalsmithing in general, has for a long time been a sort of imbued, at least through the 19th century, 18th century, if not further, with a sort of mystique, because you have people who are taking basically rocks and turning them into shiny bars, and then turning those shiny bars into tools and implements. And historically, that has been seen as a sort of magical transmutatory process. And then we see that supposedly, blacksmiths are learning various charms and spells and this sort of thing that they use during the course of their smithing process. Uh, Likewise, we get the whole, for how many centuries people would leave, well, even today, you got people putting horseshoes over entrances to houses as a sort of magical protection. You've got people in the southern U.S. who have various little magical rituals coming out of particularly Caribbean religions and religious practices and such. Whether they follow those religions or not, still continuing some of these practices that many consider superstitious, but they in this community consider to be having essentially magical effects that work. So we have that acceptance of practitioners, acceptance of the magic thing that can also be across different social levels. Other one that I think about in terms of magicians' magic and acceptance is legally. What is the legal standing of magicians? What is the legal standing of magic in the society? Which goes back to whether magic's legal or illegal. There could be different setups for that, which could be status-based. They could be gender-based. They could be sex-based. They could be race-based. They could be tied to a lot of different things. They could be tied to which practices. For instance, in the 19th century, it was not uncommon. There were a number of occult societies floating around, particularly Europe. And members of these societies were generally all upper-class individuals. They did not accept members who were, or potential practitioners who were beneath a certain social level. So that had it wasn't necessarily a official law, but there was an unspoken law, an unspoken rule, essentially. But we may have, say, a particular society with open magic may say that certain practices are legal, certain are not. Certain people are legally allowed to learn magic, some are not. It is a means of social control over magic, over something that is inherently kind of scary, dangerous, and potentially out of the control of a government agency. So they may create legal safeguards to try to prevent, whether it be where things are learned. It may not be even saying this type of magic itself is banned, but this type of magic can only be used or practiced in a certain part of the city or a certain part of the area. So, for example, if alchemy is particularly dangerous in terms of, classic historic alchemy was not necessarily likely going to have a lot of things blowing up. Fantasy alchemy, of course, is known for things blowing up. So the nation may have laws saying that alchemy can only be practiced in these particular areas where they are going to be safe. Other people are going to be safe if anything happens. If anything blows up, it's not going to burn down, a residential area or something like that. Or if it does burn down a residential area, it may just be one of those impoverished, ghettos that the upper class doesn't really care about. No manors or mansions or estates are going to be burned or threatened. Another good example is, I'm going to go back to Kate Daniels, Lona Andrews' books, or Lona Andrews' Kate Daniels books, where the practice of necromancy is not raising dead as such. The process of necromancy is creating vampires. And those vampires are mindless beasts driven by an urge to eat and feed. But necromancers can create them and then can psychically control them, basically. And the more powerful or advanced the necromancer, the more they can control at one time. So, but the U.S. government, such as whatever remains of it in this setting, has instituted laws about under what conditions the necromancers can create vampires. So there are only certain legal conditions under which a person's corpse can be donated to the necromancers. And there are certain contracts that have to be filled out and payments that are made and all of these sorts of things. So there's a legal limitation on that type of magic. The third would be, what social niche do magicians fill in this society? What social niche does magic fill in this society? Is this a trade? Is this an upper class thing? Is this an art? Is this something that people make money doing? Is this something that they do to have, say, gallery shows of or equivalent? Is this entertainment? What kind of social niche or niches do magic and magicians fill in society? That's going to have an impact on a number of things with the social order and the views of magic within the society and such. So it depends heavily on. That's going to impact a lot of how it is seen, based on where it fits into society. If it's something that is used only by, say, academics behind the walls of the university, then it's going to have more mystique to it. It's maybe going to be more, there may be some resentment on the part of the general public. Whereas if it's something that people see regularly, if it's something that the plumber uses, or the mail delivery uses, then it's going to be much more accepted in society in many respects, because it's going to be something people see on a daily basis. And this does vary a lot as well, and this can take a lot of different routes. For, case in point, we've got Terry Pratchett's Discworld, the Unseen University with the Wizards. They are doing stuff behind the walls of the university. They do most of their magic behind the walls of the university. People don't see it, but people are happier in some respects that it's behind those walls, because those walls give them a sense of protection, a sense of feeling safe from the effects of magic. Conversely, we get the witches up in most of the mountains, most of the hills, off toward Lamitos and all those places, and they're doing magic, and put that in quotes, in general situations, in daily life situations, but they still have a mystique about themselves. They have a sort of fear about themselves for people. And a lot of that is mostly because they're not doing magic. They're doing what Granny Weatherwax refers to as headology or psychology, and some showmanship. But that, even though it's common everyday stuff, it's got a little bit of mystique to it. It's got a little bit of fear to it from people because of how the practitioners act and behave, and the showmanship they use, even though they're in general public openness. So there are exceptions always in that case, but they also fill a niche. The Wizards of Unseen University fill a protective niche. They fill a academic role. They fill a social role in being there. The witches up in the mountains, they also fill a social role. They fill a medical role. They fill an agricultural role. That they are often available in helping out with, birthing of animals. They're there for childbirth. They're there for dealing with people who are injured. They're dealing with people who are sick. They're dealing with, but they're also in a protective role, because they're dealing with when the elves try to invade, or they're dealing with when vampires try to take over the kingdom, or various other sorts of things. So they are filling a particular niche in the society. And each of the witches also has their own kind of niche they're filling. You got Granny Weatherwax, who is the kind of she's the older, she's the more mysterious, she's the crotchety, crone type, who is, or the word we don't use as they put it, she is the one who is basically the enforcer in many respects. Whereas you also have Nanny Ogg, who is everybody's grandmother, everybody's dirty old grandmother, dirty old drunk grandmother, and she fills this role as this kind of jovial presence, and is the mother, and she's connected to basically everybody in the area because through her massive clan of children and grandchildren and their spouses and all of that sort of stuff. So they fill a particular niche in the society. The fourth there for social standing would be their political standing. And that could be, are the wizards, the witches, the magicians, whatever you want to call them, a political entity in the society? Do they have political representation? Do they control the government? They could be the entirety of the politics. It could be a mageocracy, where mages run everything. It could also be a situation where magicians are not allowed to be part of the government, which we see in a number of cases. I mentioned Trudy Canavan, and there's also even Discworld, where magicians are not allowed to be part of the government. In other cases, such as Jonathan Stroud's Bartimaeus series, the wizards are the government. They control all the government entities and everything. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between where they might fall, where there may be some political representation or lack of political representation, as the case may be. There may be things where certain magics aren't allowed in politics. There may be, but magic as a whole, magicians as a whole are allowed in there. Oh, geez, I don't know what is going on here. Maybe it's a dry air. I don't know. But we get the social standing. So we've got the hidden, open, legal, illegal, technology, magic, how common is it, accessibility, who can use it, who can learn it, how is it learned, religion, magic, tech and magic, I think I mentioned that, social standing, magicians, and magic. Laws also come into play. The clear ones. Hey Jenna, good to see you. Nice to see you. Just kind of talking about societies and magic and how magic affects and impacts societies in different ways and all that fun stuff. So laws and magic, certain magics may have certain laws about them. We may have a society that says, you can only do necromancy certain times or in certain places under certain conditions. It can only be used for certain things. Like, we want to keep the... We allow the necromancers to work around all of the various burials because we want to keep the dead people where they're supposed to be in the graves, not walking around. We may also have things where they say, you can raise the dead, you can do all this other stuff, but only in this particular space, or things along those lines. Another big one that might come into play with magic and laws would be summoning. We don't want to have demons and such summoned in the middle of town square, probably, in most cases. In other situations, there may be levels and layers with that. Jonathan Stroud's a good example with the Bartimaeus one, where all magic is basically summoning magic. They're all summoning demons and jinn and of various strengths and powers. But there are laws in place about what strength, what level of entity individuals can summon based on their training and their background and all that sort of stuff. There are also places that, you may have a thing of, you're allowed to summon things in this place, but not in this place, because we don't want to have to deal with some summoned being breaking containment and running amok in the city, or something along those lines. And last but not least, another really a massive one when it comes to laws in magic is enchantment. In the sense of, because enchantment is a weird word. In the fantasy genre, in the gaming community, enchantment is used for two very, very different things. On one hand, it's used for making magical items, enchanting devices. And then the other one, it's basically mind control. Historically, enchantment is generally used for mind control, glamours, that sort of thing. So that's how I'm going to discuss it in this particular case. Enchantment has a lot of enchantment as mind affecting magic has a lot of ethical and legal issues at play. On one hand, it can potentially be a good thing. We thinking about how different types of enchantment magic from different games or from different settings could be used in things like therapy, counseling, that sort of thing. It could have positive therapeutic effects. On the other hand, and obviously it has a lot of potential uses in things like crowd control, or what's what I'm looking for, de-escalating violent situations. For D&D terms, we got calm emotions, which is a great one for de-escalation of situations and whatnot. But on the other hand, we have things like charm. We have things like forgetfulness, erase memory, false memories, these sorts of things, which have huge ethical and legal ramifications. So any society in which you have open magic is probably going to have some kind of legal structure about when and how enchantment can be used, if it's allowed to be used. It could just say flat out blanket ban on all enchantment, on all mind controlling magic. Or it could say, yeah, it can be used. These types of effects can be used in these situations, but these other things, no. That segues nicely into how, how magic runs into things like crime and law enforcement, which is a big one that comes into play, and one that guy I knew in college was talking about a while back, and we bounced some things off each other with it a few years ago. But a big thing in there, we have magic in a society. Is law enforcement allowed to use magic while investigating things? Is law enforcement allowed to use enchantment magic, charm, compel truth, zone of truth for D&D terms, during interrogations or questioning? Are they allowed to use mind reading magics for gathering evidence in interrogations, in questioning? Is that evidence admissible in courts? These are big, massive ethical questions and social questions when we have magic coming into a society. If law enforcement can go around reading minds, or can bring people in for questioning and use, say, truth-compelling magic on them, where does that put us in terms of a type of society? This has got all kinds of issues tied up into it. When we start thinking about that a little bit, it becomes, or even more, building out of that, can law enforcement use necromancy to raise the spirit of a murder victim and question them. And is that admissible? Are types of magic that produce evidence that is only, say, in the mind or the senses of the caster, do those produce admissible evidence? Yes, this is some very these are some questions I've been thinking about for a while. Partially because I do a lot of homebrew. I do a lot of build my own settings. I did actually do Ravenloft. Oh, geez, a long ass time ago. I remember when Ravenloft was an adventure module, and when Ravenloft became a box set, and that's the only times I've actually ever used Ravenloft, which is a great interesting setting. But these are some interesting things to work with and say, what are the implications of this? In terms of, and this could be used, like a friend of mine who was talking about this a while back, or thinking about it a while back, particularly with policing, was thinking like, if your law enforcement has the same access to magic items, to magic as your player characters do, that can get really scary really fast. And one of his goals was to say, he was predominantly thinking about this during, I think, 2020, actually, when we were seeing the various demonstrations and protests and all that stuff going on, and kind of militarized police in the US and that sort of thing coming into play. And he was saying, how scary can we make a fantasy law enforcement? And was thinking about things like, suits of armor that have magical effects to them, for say basically riot gear. Was thinking about magic device mounted police golems, and things along these lines. And was basically just his whole kind of thought experiment was basically, how scary can this get when we start applying magic to law enforcement? And I don't think he even got into at that point to the effects of like mind control magic and mind reading magics and that sort of thing, because that gets into some really, really problematic spaces. What I do recommend, actually, in thinking about that, is there's a lot of sci-fi regarding telepathy and telepaths and such. And Babylon 5 is a really good example of the idea of law enforcement with telepathy, looking at the Psy-Corps, particularly Alfred Bester, Walter Koenig's character, and what they are allowed and not allowed to do, and how they kind of get around some of that. It's a really great example of that. But some other areas I think about, I've made up a list of different areas that we can see magic having an impact on society. Policing's a big one. And with policing, on the opposite side of the coin, we got crime. We got magic crime. What kind of crimes could magic allow to happen? What kind of crimes could be magic specific, or that magic could aid? Certainly, invisibility type spells help out with breaking and entering and assassinations and that sort of thing. On the other hand, people who are trying not to have their houses broken into, and people who are trying to avoid assassinations may have their own magic they can use to kind of counter that. So we get into a sort of arms race, if you will, a magical arms race of defense and attack and all that sort of thing. There may also be certain crimes that magic might allow for that would be otherwise not possible. So, for example, maybe something where I'm pulling the sci-fi inspiration here out, really, of clubs or places where, and actually I'm also a little bit of Castleton's coming in there too, because that was used there to some degree, where memories can be taken from one person and given to another person, so they can experience it. This is a little bit of Castleton, and a little bit of what's the Schwarzenegger movie, Total Recall, coming into play, where these are, we take memories from one person, put them into another person, they experience that as a form of entertainment. That could be a crime. to follow or do. Or it could just be entertainment in general, depending on how the society works. We could have other crimes that might come into play, like maybe there's dealing in illegal magic items. Maybe there is dealing in illegal magic. Maybe there's illegal training of people to use magic. There may be, if there's a particularly repressive government or a government that's really controlling, or a temple that's really controlling magic, maybe there's a resistance to it of magic wielders and that sort of thing. On a more kind of basic level, when we're looking at societies, magic can affect sanitation. We can make, say, potentially clean sanitation if you have your water going through if your sewage system is going through I believe, if I recall correctly, yes, yeah. Questionable uses later. Yeah, exactly. So you may have an item, if you're getting illegal magic items from a smuggler, they may not be the best items in the world. They may not be the most reliable items in the world. Or they may not be the most useful items in the world. Of course, in the hands of players, the useless items will always have weird uses in play, as we see quite often. But you may get items of questionable reliability or questionable provenance. That item you may have bought from the smuggler might work well, but it was stolen. But now you have a 500-year-old vampire chasing after you because it was stolen from his house. Little problems like that coming into play. Minor little niggling details. Whoop. Let me see if I can moderate that and put that back in there. Nightbot got mad at you. Darn it, how do I do this? Okay, that's another way to do it. Sorry, I'm still figuring out how modern Nightbot and all that sort of stuff works. Oh, I would potentially do all caps too. Yes, it's perfectly normal. Anti-gravity muffin on a mini boss and drop him in the town. Yeah, that sounds par for the course. Yeah, totally normal. But sanitation comes into play. In, say, GURPS, for example, the purify water spell requires a ring, and you pour the water through the ring, and the water goes in dirty one side and comes out purified the other side. Now make your ring the size of your sewage pipes, and enchant it, and let all the water run through there, and it comes out the other side clear. Or you put little rings in, like people's faucets or whatnot, and that deals with some sanitation stuff coming into play. Or you have, bound fire elementals who, burn trash, burn the city's trash or whatever it happens to be. So sanitation can come into play. That can actually even allow really weird city and building situations. Like there's one city I'm working on kind of right now where water purification is done through various bound water elementals that it can, and other such things, that it just kind of cycles through these, and they clean it, take all the bad stuff out of it, grow and work off of that, and then the clean water kind of goes through, because the city is basically a closed system. In some ways, it's kind of like Planescape's sigil in some regards, but not quite. Yeah, yes, exactly. Little gelatinous cubes and morgues. There's a really great example in I don't remember which D&D module it is. It's one of the Critical Role ones. That was officially D&D one, where they basically released gelatinous cubes into the city, into the village at night to clean up the streets, and they tell everybody, keep your doors locked and stay inside during the night, and gelatinous cubes go rolling through the streets of the city, cleaning up cleaning up everything on the streets. Of course, the characters have to go out and do something at night, so all kinds of fun ensues from that. So we got, certainly all those sorts of ideas come into play, that cleanup crews and all that sort of thing comes in. What else comes in there? There could be energy things coming in there, depending on what kind of magic is in place. Magic is definitely going to affect politics if it exists in various ways. I think I covered that a little bit previously, so I'm not going to go into much there again. Magic might affect education in that, and I'm actually going to check things off because I am doing my usual thing and not paying attention to exactly what order I'm looking at things here. We'll mark those things off. Okay, cool. I said education. Not just in who learns magic, who's available to it, but also how it's done. We could have things like illusion magic would allow us to do things like a fantasy, basically a fantasy heads-up display or a fantasy hologram thing to show stuff, versus the like. I'm dating myself as far as age here. Transparencies on the overhead device, or PowerPoints, if we want to be more up to date. We may, instead of having those, we could have a 3D model in a class that's an illusion for all intents and purposes, if it's present enough in the society. So certainly can have effects on education in that regard. Heck, you go back to enchantment, and you got a teacher with a disruptive class casting calm emotions on them to get them to settle down, with all the ethical ramifications of that, which is discussed to some degree, kind of tangentially, honestly, but possible with the Netflix adaptation of the Umbrella Academy. Because the one character's ability power is to basically command for the D&D spell version, but as rumors, and she at one point was using it on her child to get them to settle down, go to bed, that sort of thing, with all of the massive ethical issues and whatnot that come into play with that, and some of that was discussed during the course of the show. What else we got? Transportation, magical transportation, big effect. Changes a lot of things, even down to the where we put cities and such. Historically, traditionally, cities, settlements are built on where there are natural resources or where there are trade routes or transportation routes. So they're either in places where it's easy to make a road, or they're in places that have water, rivers, streams that can be used for transportation or for fresh water. But if magic transportation's in place, we don't necessarily have to care about roads or waterways or things like that for transportation purposes. One thing I've even experimented with or played with a little bit, thought about some, is with certain kinds of magical transportation, say teleporting, if teleporting is viable, if it is accessible in a sort of cheap form, you can have a nation of non-contiguous settlements. You can have a nation that is of, say, that has 5 cities that are spread out on different parts of the continent. You have multiple nations like this that are non-contiguous, where there are basically no borders, but there are nations. And that gets all kinds of messy, at least in the times I've thought about it. There's a version of this in some way. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. What was it? What the heck was it called? I just read it not too long ago. Was it this one? Yes. Prashanth Srivatsa. I hope I'm not badly misspelling that or saying that. Book The Spice Gate. I'll put that in chat because I am totally murdering their their name, I'm sure. Basically, every city in the setting is non-contiguous. They're not attached to each other physically, but they are attached through basically teleport gates. And the teleport gates have to be activated by using a certain amount of a particular spice. Each city has its own spice associated with it. So you take that spice, you throw it at the gate, you walk through the gate, and it takes you to that city. But only certain people are able to do that and transport through it, which means they become a sort of second class or caste within the society and such. But you have a culture, a essentially nation of 7 or 8 cities that are not actually physically connected to each other, or at least people don't travel to those connections. They use as magical means of transportation instead. And that's I kind of find that kind of an intriguing idea to play with, that if magical transportation is viable and relatively cheap, you could have non-contiguous nations where you have cities and territories that aren't connected to each other but are part of the same nation, with other ones coming in between them. I find that to be a very interesting idea, where you don't really have borders as such. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that kind of magic transportation. It could be through magical beasts. You could have dragon transportation or Pegasus transportation or things along those lines. You could have magical airships that are the major transportation means. All sorts of different things that come into play there. We can throw. The limits are basically imagination in that regard, but they can do you can have various things that might affect transportation for. If, say, golems or magical constructs are relatively easy to make or cheap, you may have carriages that are pulled by construct horses that don't get tired, that can travel 24 hours a day, which changes the travel times between places significantly. There may even be self-propelled carriages that come into play. A whole bunch of different possibilities that would float around there. But it depends on the magic system, how the magic works, and how available it is in so many respects. What's another fun one? Medicine. Depending on the type of magic, how it works, we got to see we might want to think about how it affects medicine. How does it affect, taking care of illnesses? How does it affect dealing with injuries? Are there conditions that magic can't do anything about if there is healing magic? We might say, for example, one setting I'm working with right now, I decided that magic, while it can partially heal injuries caused by magic, it cannot fully heal them. So that if somebody loses a leg due to a spell that was cast, then magic won't necessarily be able to replace the leg or regrow the leg. They may be able to get a prosthesis, but not like a whole new natural leg in that regard. Or and this handles things like this can be a way to cover things that say like, well, if magic is ever present, is not ever present, but is ubiquitous. If it's relatively cheap and easy to work with, then why do we have people who are not? Why do we have people who are missing limbs, or who have these or whatever sorts of genetic conditions or other injuries or that sort of thing? And we may say, okay, well, magic can work with medicine. Magic can do healing in some cases, but maybe not in other cases. Or there are things that kind of prevent it from, or maybe it's difficult to do, or maybe it is something that harms the caster. So D&D doesn't like this because D&D wants to kind of keep people getting hit points and all that sort of stuff, so that fights can continue and all that sort of thing. But what if we had we'll say a D&D hack where casting Cure Wounds, we'll say whatever, third level's 3d8 or something like that, second level 3d8, whatever level 3d8, you roll your 3d8 to heal somebody's injuries. You get, we'll say 18, because what the heck. but then the caster takes half of that in damage. So you can heal the person 18, but you take 9 yourself. And this kind of affects how this gets used. Or maybe they use one of the restoration ones to cure somebody's blindness, but they become temporarily blinded themselves, or get a penalty to perception because of eyesight being affected by this, or something along those lines. That drastically changes how useful healing magic becomes, and kind of it comes with a bit of a price in that way, which affects how it gets used and where it gets used. It may also change what it can do in a number of cases, and it has certain that definitely has implications for things like revive or resurrection. If the caster of healing magic takes some of the injury, then what is that? How does that work with resurrection magic or revivification magic? Yeah, you get some fun things potentially coming into play with that. Tied in with that, we also have elective medicine, or what we might refer to as elective surgery. Can magic do this? Some magics may or may not be able to. And what that can be is, or we also may refer to it as the magic equivalent of plastic surgery. This is something that could potentially come into a society, a culture, if magic is plentiful enough or strong enough. And that could also dovetail into magic crime, in that, you have somebody who is a criminal, they go to we'll say it's we'll go with an assassin because why not? They do their assassination, they come back home, they come back to their sponsor, their patron, and they hang out for an hour or two while somebody throws some spells on them and completely changes their appearance. And then they go free again, or go out into the world again. Or you may have bits where people are able to get whatever kind of appearance they want through the use of magical means and such, or may have their minions looking however they want based on being able to do this. A really great example of this that comes to mind is World of Darkness, the VTM vampire branch of it, looking at the I always screw up how to pronounce their names, but let me see. Do we have a pronunciation on here? No, of course not. Why would we want to pronounce it? Oh, there we go. Pronunciation. First thing that pops up as suggestions. Zamissi, or Zamishi, the TZIM clan that have the abilities to craft bones and flesh. They are a great example of this, of the potential for magic being used to kind of reshape people, reshape beings, whether it be animals or sentient sapient things, which would also be really great for some parts of Ravenloft, honestly. Thinking about how some of the Ravenloft lords and ladies, I don't remember what they're calling them as far as these days, but thinking about what they might do if they could sort of like reshape their the appearance of their minions and such in whatever way they kind of wanted to. That could get really interesting. Different directions my mind goes as I'm kind of running off of ideas. Some other fun ones might be architecture. Well, obviously with like elective surgery type magic, body shaping magic, that sort of thing. Definitely lots of legal things that could come into play with that. Lots of crime things that could come into play with that. Lots of ethical things that could come into play with that. Lots of opportunity that could come into play with that as well. One that we don't see come up too often, but I think is at least not explicitly, but I think could be interesting too, is architecture. How does magic affect architecture? If you can design a building however you want, without having to worry about physics, without having to worry about pesky little things like gravity, or the weight bearing capabilities of different materials, because you can magic it, to either reinforce it or to make parts of it float or whatever it happens to be. How does that change your architectural design and your shaping of things and whatnot? You basically can do whatever you want within the bounds of the capabilities of magic. That also gets us into things like extra dimensional spaces and all that sort of thing. Even though, despite the various current events and current news and things, I would refer in this case to the book Neverwhere, which has what's referred to as an associative house, where the house basically consists of one room that has a bunch of paintings hanging in it. And each painting connects to or is the doorway to a different room in the place that are not attached to each other and that are effectively extra dimensional spaces. So that's also another fun possibility with magic and architecture, of saying that if you can create extra space, if you can make things TARDIS-like, larger on the inside, then you don't need a whole lot of space to build a mansion. You could build a mansion out of one room and have 1,000 rooms coming out of it, depending on how many paintings or pictures or other things you can load into that room that can create little pocket dimensions or teleport you to different places or whatever it happens to be. Actually, another good example that comes to mind of that magic and architecture, well, one, Trudy Canavan, the Magician's Guild series. There was a lot of magic used in architecture during the course of that, but it's kind of a back burner sort of thing. And there's I can't remember which of the books in the series it is. I want to say it's... I want to say it's Sawmoth, but I'm probably wrong. Book list, Leroy Records. Yeah, that'll probably help. Yeah, published. Yes. Was it? This is going to bother me, so I'm definitely going to be looking this up here. It was probably one of those two, I think. Nope, not that one. Yes, it was Velista. Stephen Brust's book, Velista. Where basically magic is used to build this particular estate outside the main city, and it has various bizarre, strange time and space characteristics to it that are utterly nuts in many respects. So again, we got magic affecting architecture and kind of how things work in there. Terry Pratchett actually has a good example too in Discworld with the... I don't remember what the name of the block of buildings is, but it was designed by Bloody Stupid Johnson. And it's basically it's a something crescent maybe? Let me see. That should do it. Bloody Stupid Johnson architecture. That should probably do it. What did he design? Organs, bathrooms, monuments. The Empirical Crescent. That's what it was. The Empirical Crescent was a street just in Ankh-Morpork Park that's a high-rent area, what was generally a high-rent area. Rents would be higher except for the Empirical Crescent. Let's see. Multi-dimensional approach to architecture. Outside perfectly normal street, but inside the front door of number 1 opens in the back bedroom of number 15. The ground floor window of number 3 shows the view from the second story of number 9. And the smoke from the dining room fireplace of number 2 came out the chimney of number 19. No residents tend to stay in Empirical Crescent more than a few months and always leave very quickly. Enjoys a low crime rate, as thieves generally prefer to break into one apartment at a time. Possible that the connections from a tesseract, but unlikely they actually intended it. So we get that again, that idea of magic and architecture kind of meeting together in weird ways. That can be kind of fun. In this case, used for comedic effect. What else? What else? What else? Warfare. Certainly, anytime we bring magic into things, into a society, and it becomes something that can be used regularly or relatively easily, we get into the effect of how does this affect warfare. And by warfare, we're not just talking about like battlefield type situation, but we're also talking about things like fortifications and such. We like the idea, so much of the fantasy genre is built out of, medieval and early modern European stuff, and even early modern and Europe and medieval parts of other parts of the world. So we like we tend to like the walled cities, the castles, all that fun stuff, the kind of aesthetic of that. However, city walls, castle walls, historically, were not designed to withstand fireballs or thrown lightning bolts, nor were they designed to deal with things like dragons or griffin-mounted people, knights or whatnot. So if these kind of come into play, and if they are relatively easy to work with in these situations, they will affect how some of these designs come into play. And they'll affect how certain actions are taken and whatnot. This could be very minor. So a really minor version in Stephen Brust's Dragera, there are basically the magical equivalent of flashbang grenades, called flash stones. You throw them, you prime it, you throw it, and it creates a loud noise and a burst of light. Basically a magical flashbang grenade. That were relatively heavily used for a while, and then they fell out of fashion. Conversely, we've got Harry Turtledove, who has his Videssos books, in which he says basically magic relies on the person remaining calm and kind of centered and focused. So strong emotions cause magic to fail. Therefore, magic is not really useful in battlefield situations because the emotion levels are too high, and that interferes with all the magic and that sort of thing. So mostly magicians stay a good distance back, and they throw spells at other magicians, and they don't really do anything to the actual, the rank and file people. They're more for show than anything else. But when you have people running around throwing fireballs and things, that kind of changes how you have to set things up to kind of protect against these various things and whatnot. Or if you just say, yeah, screw it, it's not worth it. It's going to be too much effort to try to protect against this thing. Let's just forget about it. Brust is another good example of that. In Brust's world, people don't wear metal armor. There is no full plate or chainmail or that sort of thing. Partly because Brust doesn't particularly care for full plate armor, that sort of stuff. But his in-world reason is that metal attracts magic. So if somebody was to wear a suit of full plate armor on a battlefield where somebody threw a spell, everybody who threw spells, all those spells would be attracted to that armor. And that person would take a massive beating. So nobody wears metal armor on battlefields. It's more kind of a musketeers type setup in many regards. But with people also running around with claymores and stuff. Because it's fun, or part of his cool stuff theory of literature, which basically comes down to the author will include whatever it is they consider to be cool stuff, and the more their definition of cool stuff lines up with the reader's definition of cool stuff, the more the reader will enjoy the work. Very, very, very heavily modified version of it. But when you think about that, if there is going to be anything that kind of comes into play with international conflicts, warfare, that sort of thing, magic is potentially going to affect it in some way, shape, or form. And you can also bring in things like aerial corps and that sort of thing, whether it be from pegasi and griffins and dragons or airships or whatever it happens to be, if there are enough in sufficient quantity that can come into play there. Or flying people for the heck of it, because why not? Those are always fun. That creates a sort of three-dimensional level of things. I know that kind of is... we think about, for example, the first ball, the effects Magic had in the first ball with Castleton, of course, where people were throwing spells and then pieces were falling away, but then they were kind of operating on a lot of different dimensions, a lot of different levels and layers, in a small scale version. Let's see, what else do I have down here? My last three big ones. Sure, I got time for that. Why not? Economics of Magic. Certainly, Magic is going to come in there. You may have can people sell their time to use as Magic as services? This is obviously this has been a core element of gaming for quite a while, whether it be video gaming or tabletop gaming for a while, of going to find somebody and buy a spell from them, or buy their services for casting a spell, and also buying and selling of magic items, whether it be potions or magic swords or rings or whatever it happens to be. There's a really great Viva La Dirt League sketch about the economics of magical items, and where all of these poor vendors in towns and villages, the poor shopkeepers in villages and towns get money to buy magic items off of people. There's also that question of, they also did something about the treasure rat or something along those lines. I don't remember what it was now off the top of my head. It was also a really great sketch regarding how these magic items get placed around around everywhere. But we got some potential economics of Magic. Somebody's got to create all of these potions. They aren't coming out of nowhere. We take a look at, say, video games, for example, fantasy video games. They are making healing potions and mana potions by the industrial vat load. There is some factory somewhere in the world that has dozens of vats, scores of vats of healing potions and mana potions being made. But of course we ignore that in large part because it's a necessary conceit of the game. But for some worlds, especially if we're doing it for a writing world or something like that, we may want to think about, how does this impact magic as a commodity, or magical devices as a commodity? How does this kind of impact what's going on there? Do we have a magic market? Are these things that are sold in the general market alongside your grains and your boots and stuff? Or is this something that there's a special market for? Are these things that are, do we have wizards who set up shop somewhere in town and just, do spells for pay? Are they more rarefied than that? Are they ones who say no, I have to have a noble patron who is going to pay for this, and you have to be wealthy enough to pay me to do this, that sort of thing. So that can kind of come into play. Some other thoughts that float around there, it goes back to enchantment and such. Privacy issues in a society. If we have a society where people can scry, where people can do divinations, where people can do mind reading, where people can do various other magical means of seeing what people are doing, sending messages to them, looking inside their heads, all that sort of stuff. What does this mean for privacy in the society? And that goes back to how open, how common, how accessible is magic and all that sort of stuff. If it's not very accessible or common, there's probably not going to be a whole lot socially going on with it. If it is pretty common, there are probably going to be laws in place. Now, do those laws mean that people don't break them? Of course not. But, because laws don't necessarily deter criminal or crimes, they are an agreed upon punishment for crimes. So we do get into potential privacy issues there. If we can tamper with mail, if there is mail in the setting, that's going to be a privacy issue. If we can tamper with people's heads, that's going to be a privacy issue. If we can scry or divine into and see inside their homes, privacy issues coming into play. And questions of how that works within the setting, within the magic and that sort of thing. Because that becomes a big potential, another big potential barrel to deal with and think about. Because there are probably then going to be countermeasures developed, for one thing. If there are ways to magically look inside a house, scry on somebody, then there are probably going to be countermeasures. There are probably going to be wards that can be set up that can prevent that. D&D's non-detection spell was a good example. If you put that on you may have a non-detection ring, for example, where you put that on and you can't be found with scrying or that sort of stuff. These sorts of things may come into play. So when we get the one, we get the counter as well, in many respects. I didn't bring up entertainment, which I should probably throw in there. Entertainment's a good one to think about. We could have like illusory shows going on as entertainment, where you have illusionists who basically throw spells and make creative light shows or even theatrical shows with illusions. We may have situations where people are using, fly or strength enhancing spells to do acrobatics and do like aerial maneuvers and all that sort of stuff. We could have flybys like the Blue Angels, but with wizards who have thrown flying spells on themselves, or armed brooms, as the case may be. We could have sports that involve magical effects of various sorts. That's a pretty common one in urban fantasy. Good example. What's his name? Yeah, that guy. The guy. Lev Grossman in the Magicians series has a sport that involves magic at Breakbills University. We get some of these things that kind of float around. We have a similar going on with Cassandra Clare and Holly Black with the Magisterium series, where there is a bit of a magic-related sport going on into it in a sort of YA level piece. So we get some of those kind of things that may come into play with entertainment. Obviously, if we want to go to other realms, we get recreational substances that can come into play, thanks to alchemists or whatnot, and other things that can fall in there under the entertainment sphere of things. Likewise, we may have protections in place for mundane entertainments. If you can look ahead into the future and see what cards are going to come up, that's going to be a problem for gambling halls and casinos. If you can use a little bit of telekinesis to adjust the dice with a roll, that's going to be an issue that a gambling hall / casino is going to try to deal with in some way, shape, or form. Or they might be doing themselves in order to stack things for the house. So that's certainly things that may come in, that other possibilities may come into play there. And right now I'm just kind of tossing out random things and moving through relatively quickly. I'm just throwing stuff out there as possibilities. Things that kind of get the creative juices flowing and all that sort of thing. Last but not least, in my notes, I've got magic for intelligence, counterintelligence. Magic for James Bond with magic. Or what's his name? Jason Bourne with magic. Mission Impossible with magic. How does having magic, the presence of magic, affect spying and counter-spying? And kind of work with those things. Because that's certainly going to be a place, if magic works, if magic is relatively easy to use or get a hold of, or is viable, you can be pretty darn sure that probably somebody is going to be using it for intelligence, counterintelligence, for spying and counter-spying, because human nature being what it is, and the nature of political entities being what it is. I threw together, just on a bit of a lark at one point, what I referred to as what did I call it? It was a magic item, and I can't remember what I called it now. It was I think it was the spy's wardrobe, was what I called it, or maybe the ambassador's wardrobe. One of the two. I think I did two different versions. But basically, the wardrobe, and I did it kind of as like a D&D-ish item, it did a modified variant of either disguise self or alter self that only affected clothing, the item itself. So it came as a sort of like robe that then could be altered to a set of pre-programmed, if you will, outfits. So that basically your ambassador, your spy, could travel with one piece of clothing, but change it into a dozen different possibilities. And I think I maybe put the ambassador's version as like a disguise self variant, which would be an illusion, versus an alter self version, which would be the spy one being an alter self version, which was more of a transmutation effect, where it was actually changing into whatever outfit it was. As just a little thought experiment for that kind of intelligence, counterintelligence thing that kind of popped into my head while I was like going off to get carry out dinner some night or something like that. I don't remember what it was now, but yeah. That's just a really kind of basic level in some regards. But you also think about all the various, gadgetry we see in, say, Mission Impossible, the Bond movies, that sort of thing. Magic equivalents can come into play. Thinking about how do you keep state secrets from a opposing nation or company, as the case may be, guild that has scryers, people who can scry or people who can read minds on their staff. What other ways can we do things with that? What other ways can we spy on people using magic, or use magic to gather intelligence and such? Just some things that kind of run through my head every so often when I'm thinking about these things. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm kind of wrapping a little bit. I'm also a little out of it because I did 3 hours of class. I did 3 hours of teaching this morning, of composition teaching this morning before running over to do this. So I'm kind of my brain may be a little fried, but anything from both lurkers? Anything kind of come to mind or want to toss out there? I'm happy to take questions, comments, feedback, thoughts. Don't have anything to throw because we're virtual, but unless I start seeing virtual tomatoes or virtual knives in the chat. And assuming that won't happen. Do we even have that? Is that even an option in there? Now I'm let me see. Now it's got me wondering. No search results for tomato. Okay. What about fruit? Nope. No search results for fruit. Okay. I had to look. Just in case. No, okay. Well, hopefully that was interesting at the very least, or potentially helpful or whatnot. Obviously, this will stay up on Twitch for the next week, and I will download it at some point in time and move it over to YouTube as well, if I remember to, which is a kind of big if. Uh, I'm getting better about that. But if nothing else comes up or comes in mind, I think I'm going to go ahead and shove off and take care of a few things before I've got to go do some necessary errands. So I will go ahead and sign off in that case with good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever it is for you. I'm Brent, an author, amateur world builder, writing educator. You can find me at werewolf-dr on Threads, Instagram, Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube, as well as here, or werewolf_dr on Bluesky. That's what that thing is called. And I do have links in chat. I will put them back there again just because what the heck, why not? And also, or they will be in the description on YouTube. Otherwise, hope your day is good. Hope things go well. Enjoy yourselves. And we'll hopefully see everyone around at some point in time. Maybe next week. I'm trying to shift over to, because of my work schedule changing, I am shifting over by and large to this, doing Wednesdays, probably about 12:30-ish, give or take a little bit, depending on traffic, to 2:30 or thereabouts. From this point for the next at least 15 weeks or so, including this one. So we'll see what happens. Thanks to my wonderful change teaching schedule and such. Otherwise, have a good day. Hope things go well for the remainder of the day. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Happy to hear that. I will try to come up with some other possibilities, or I'm also open to suggestions. What the heck is that doing? Okay, yes. I don't know why this is yelling. I will work on Nightbot. I will try to figure out and play around with what Nightbot is doing, because I only started doing this in September and I have no idea what I'm doing for the most part. So I'm also happy to take suggestions on tweaking Nightbot. Nightbot seems to have a vengeance for a lot of people in places, particularly on AJ's feed. But that just may be the crowd that appears on AJ's feed. And on that note, yep, I will hope to see everybody next time. Like I said, I'm going to try to go for 12:30 to whatever on 2:30 at the latest, but probably 12:30 on Wednesdays, Eastern Standard. We're in Eastern Standard now. Yes, daylight saving sucks, and we'll see how that goes. I will probably be a little unhinged because I'll be coming off of 3 hours of dealing with students, so we'll see how that goes. So take care, and hopefully see you next week or next time. I might do some bonus ones every now and then. And definitely see you Saturday. What do I do? Is there anybody to raid? There's Hamish. What the hell? Let's go over and see Hamish. Why not? Oh, no, there are other people running here. I don't know any of these folks, and Hamish is not up there for it. So, okay, maybe not. Nah. If I do it on here, is that different? I don't know. I'm playing with stuff. Sorry. I'm figuring out what Stream Manager's got for me here. That is going to be... this one. What does Stream Manager give me? There we go. Now I got one coming up. Awesome. Let's do that. Why not? Let's go over and see Hamish. Because why not? Hamish is kind of fun.
Hey, werewolf doctor, rating me. I do.